Welcome to the Good Shepherd and the Child podcast, where we explore the spirituality of the Christian child through the method of the catechesis of the Good Shepherd. I am your host, Carrie Mecchi Lozano. Today, Diane Olsen is back on the podcast to help us explore who is the transitioning child. So this is the 6-year-old, the 9-year-old, and the 12-year-old specific to our work in catechesis of the Good Shepherd. And how can we best serve this child in our atria? I hope you enjoy. Diane Olsen, welcome back to the Good Shepherd and the Child podcast.
Thank you, Carrie. It's always fun to chat with you here.
It is always fun to chat with you. I enjoy having you. So in case anybody hasn't heard the past episodes that you have joined us on the podcast, tell us a little bit about who you are.
Well, my name is Diane Olsen. I live in Overland Park, Kansas. For the past 23 years, I coordinated a CGS program at Holy Trinity Catholic Church in Lenexa, Kansas. Just retired last October. But I've been a catechist since my youngest was 3 months old, and he is now 32, 33. So I've been really blessed to be in the atrium listening to God with children for a long time and just treasure that part of my life. It's been a huge gift.
Isn't it nice when you have one child who's like your gauge for something like that?
Yes. I remember taking him. He was 3 months old when I went to my formation, and I thought, I hope it's okay I bring him. And I remember walking in, and Tina Lillig was sitting behind the desk at the welcome area, and she said right away, she says, I'm so glad you brought your baby. That's what our work is all about. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is a great place.
Yeah. This is where I belong.
That's right.
These are my people.
Exactly. That's right. And it's proven to be true.
Yes. And you've also done the MAPS course, the Masters at Aquinas. Is that right?
I have. I was in the first group. We were the guinea pigs. And it was a tremendous experience. I really went into it thinking, wasn't sure what I would use it for. So I thought, I'm just going to do this for me.
Yeah.
And when I was done with it, I realized that I had learned all these marvelous things in CGS, and they felt like they were all floating out in the ether somewhere. And after my MAPS CGS, it felt like it all came together in these organized, systematic ways, and I knew how to talk about them. And what a gift. What a tremendous experience. I really, really loved it. And of course, the people and the professors were amazing. So it was a great experience for me.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And you're also a formation leader for level 1 and level 2.
Yes, I am. And that is a surprise. I never thought I was interested in working with adults. I really love children. But when I saw on the faces of the adults the same reaction I saw on the kids after a presentation, I thought, oh my goodness, this speaks to everybody. So how could I say no? And I still plan on doing formation as I'm asked in my retirement because I just enjoy it so much.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're very good at it. I've been blessed to be on the benefiting end of that. So I appreciate your gifts.
Yeah. God is so good to us, isn't he? Oh.
Yes. Yes. So I'm excited about this topic. I feel like it's a little unique. So we're going to talk about this transitioning child. So we've talked in the podcast before about the planes of development, but I think we need to just quickly explain what that is so that it can be a foundation for our conversation. So if you want to just dive into the planes of development and who is this transitioning child? Like, what does that mean?
Yes, I looked on my shelf in my library collection of Catechesis of the Good Shepherd books and pamphlets and everything, and I found this from AMI, this booklet, The 4 Planes of Education, Dr. Maria Montessori, edited by Mario. And I thought, perfect. So I read it. I hadn't read it in a while, and it was very great to be able to go over it again. But I think one of the things I love about the way they describe the 4 planes is that they're like the 4 stages of a butterfly. So each is unique. The 4 stages of the butterfly, the egg, the larva or the caterpillar, the pupa or the chrysalis, and then the adult butterfly. If you think of those, even visually, they are all completely different. And I think when we look at the growing child, we always think, oh, that's Sam or that's Andrea.
Right.
We don't realize that they too are changing. Every human person goes into these 4 planes of development and has these incredible incredible stages of growth that are very different from one another. So I really like that visual of the 4 stages of the butterfly. It really helps me think about what's going on.
Yeah, I like that too. So we're talking about the first plane being 0 to 6.
Mm-hmm.
Typically.
Yeah.
Because there can be some wiggle room in this.
Right. You need parameters just to be able to talk about it. So that's how Montessori decided to delineate it, 0 to 6, and then 6 to 12, 12 to 18, and 18 to 24 years.
Yeah.
But you're right. There's a little bit of wiggle room in the 6, a little bit of wiggle room even in the 9, even in the 12, even in the 3, you know. It depends on how each unique, growth of the person takes place. So
Right. And then within each plane, there's kind of, what's the word for the right in the middle that Montessori uses? I want to say apex, but I don't think that's the word she uses.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It's drawn like a triangle with the point being in the middle. And I always think of the shaded part on the left. And then if you split that triangle in half, she shades the left part and the right part is clearer. And she says that first half of the plane is the people are collecting data. They're just experiencing and collecting and experiencing and collecting. And then the second half is when they organize and consolidate the skills and the knowledge they've gained. And then it helps them to use it to their own personal needs. So that point again, though, like you said, it's this transition, but it's not, exactly on your 3rd birthday or exactly on your 9th birthday. Just, when you're ready, it happens. You wake up one day and you're different.
Right. So right around 3, right around 6, right around 9, right around 12. Mm-hmm. And that's as far as we'll go, because that's as far as we go right now.
And that's plenty.
That's plenty. There's kind of some shifts in a child that when you educate yourself to see them, you start to notice them. But in the atrium, that's when a child will move from one atrium to another. Again, variably.
Right.
Like when a child is ready. I think it's really important for us to point out that moving from one plane to another, or moving from one atria level to another, is not like a graduation. It's not an accomplishment for your child to be moving from level 1 to level 2, or move from the first plane to the second plane. It's not like the goal to move them faster.
Yes. In fact, Montessori goes so far as to say, if you move too quickly without completely experiencing and achieving all you can achieve in that plane, and you move on to the next plane, your next experience will be lacking because you weren't solidly developed in the previous plane. So you don't want to rush it. You want to be very observant and look for signs from the child. There's nothing wrong with saying, my child's 6, I'm going to keep him in level 1 one more year. That might be where that child is very comfortable. And it might be that after Christmas, that child is ready to move on.
Right.
It doesn't happen nicely and neatly like the beginning and end of a school year. It's developmental, and the child is an organic being. So that's where our powers of observation have to be really, really good. So we can see, this child is different now. This child needs new things.
Right. And if that child who at 6 years old does not seem to be quite ready to move to level 2, and you let them spend another semester or so in level 1, I feel like that child is then better prepared. Just like what you said, Maria Montessori quote, of the Maria Montessori quote. They're now more foundationally prepared to be in that next plane, be in that next level atria.
Yes, and I think as adults, we have to trust the child.
Yeah.
That the child knows what is best for them, what they're ready for. And you'll see signs if they're not ready. They won't want to go. They'll be quiet or uncomfortable or not engaged. And then they go back to level 1 and they're comfortable again, and they're helping a younger child with something, and there's a smile on their face. It's pretty obvious if you know what to look for. And I think that we should work really hard to respect that and to trust the child, that the child knows when it's time to move on. And sometimes that's hard with parents too, because I want to say, especially if it's your first child and the parent of a first child is learning just like the child is learning, you don't have the experience that you might with other children, but you really just have to trust that the child knows what the child needs, and just be observant.
Yeah. Yeah. That trust, that is so important in this work.
Yeah.
Well, I want to talk to you about the transitioning child. So the child that is ready to move, or maybe not ready to move. So that around 6-ish child, the around 9-ish child, and around 12. I feel like that child, as a catechist, that child has different needs than the other children in the atrium. They have different behaviors. They have different things that we need to be observing in.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about who this child is. Who is this transitional child? What characteristics do we see in them?
Well, in order to notice a change, we have to be familiar with what the first plane child is like.
Yeah.
And so we want to remember, basically, Montessori said they have an absorbent mind. So the environment is so important to them, and they absorb everything in their environment in order to form themselves as a person. They want to know how to use the environment for their good, and the environment is very important to them in the sense that they know it so well that if you change even one little thing, they'll notice it right away. So, right. Then all of a sudden, and we don't know when, we think around the age of 6, the child moves from the absorbent mind to what Montessori called the reasoning mind. So instead of ordering their environment, they're going to order their thoughts. And so all of a sudden, and I used to see this when I was coordinating a CGS program, a level 1 catechist would come in and say to me, I don't know what to do with this child. You know, he's asking me questions, and he's more talkative, and he always wants to work with his friends, and he's not sitting quietly at the prayer table anymore. You know, he used to be such a quiet child. You know? And none of those things are bad. The child has just moved to the next plane of development and needs a different kind of environment in order to thrive. So, and isn't it interesting that the child is just doing naturally what it needs to do? It's grown up a little bit. It's changed from the egg to the larva, right?
Right.
But unfortunately, in a human being, you know, you don't grow a third arm when you go in the second plane.
It's not so physically obvious.
No. There are some physical things, though, like their teeth start to fall out, and they lose their baby fat and get kind of long and lanky, and they get messier because they're not so concerned with ordering the environment. They're ordering their thoughts. So all of a sudden, when they used to keep their room or their toys so neat, now they're messy, and you can't figure out why, because all their energy is going toward organizing their thoughts. So that's part of the observation thing of being able to identify this second plane is, you start to see these characteristics. That's your sign that your child has moved to the next plane. So it's time to give them something different to help them develop well.
And what about the 9 and 12-year-old?
Yeah, so the 9-year-old is very interesting, I think, after the age of 8, and usually a lot of times that corresponds with the celebration of the sacraments. And then they come back in. I think my experience with third-year level 2 kids is they come in and they're just almost bored.
Yeah.
Or it's just like, I'm used to this environment. There's nothing new and exciting for me. And maybe I'll just kind of hang out until I can go to level 3. You know?
Right. And being around 6-year-olds, I find like they're like, oh, look at all these little kids in here. You know, like kind of act like they're...
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And that's totally appropriate. That's exactly how they should behave. They're ready for more. And then the 12-year-olds, they're thinking, well, you know, youth group sounds pretty good. I'd like to have pizza every Sunday. And, you know, they're ready to be off with their friends. They want to invite a friend to come with them who's never come before. You know, they're branching out, or they think to themselves, I don't want to go to youth group. It's so noisy there. I want to stay in atrium another year. You know, so it's very interesting to see the dynamics, not only from the developmental plane, but also from the personality of the child.
Right. I feel like as you get older, there is more variation in the characteristics that you're going to see in a 12-year-old than you will in a 6-year-old. It's just, you know, we just deviate the more we're exposed to in life. That makes sense. So this child that's transitioning potentially out of level 3, yeah, you're going to have a lot of variation in what you see in those 12-year-olds.
Absolutely.
Some are big, they look like teenagers, and some are really small, and
Yes.
some are interested in the opposite sex, or, and some are not. And
yes.
yeah.
And all of that is great. All of that is as it should be.
Yeah.
So we just need to celebrate that, but also be ready with some tools in our hip pockets, right? In order to keep the child engaged in this life with God that we're able to share with them in the atrium.
Okay, so what are some of those tools? How can we serve this child better?
Yeah, well, should we start with the 6?
Yeah.
Yeah, the poor 6. So, sometimes you get a child who transitions the second plane, and it's right after Christmas in the middle of your atrium year. And they come back and they're chatting with their friends and they're making all these tracing packets together. And, they're not the quiet kids. So
Yeah.
they can sometimes it's good if you have a mixed age group, you can think of them as your junior catechist. So they can offer presentations they do well to younger children. They would be a lot more social and take a lot more leadership in the atrium session, to the point where they might even want to choose a song or a prayer card, or they might want to set up chairs around the prayer table for people to sit in. They might want to champion the 10 minutes of cleanup before the end of the atrium session. All of a sudden, it's kind of nice because the catechist does less and less and the child does more and more. So if you can think of it that way, that might make it in a more appealing light, right? You don't have to do everything anymore. You have helpers now. Yeah. But then they also need a different way of using the materials. So I think that they really like things like labeling. It kind of depends on what their reading skills are. They can either match the word or actually read the word. But I find that if you go back to those familiar things like the altar table or the geography work or the city of Jerusalem, and you have labels just with words on them, that they could match to the chart on the wall. They don't have to be dependent on you to say where the label goes.
Yeah.
To say, here's some labels, and see if you can label this work and let me know when you're done. I'd like to enjoy it with you. And oh boy, did they love that. That is really, and rightly so, because they're getting really good at starting to be able to read. So it meets their developmental need much more than it would have before, when they were just, you were telling them the name of the article and setting it on the altar, and then they were, following your lead. Now they can name it for themselves. They can label all of them, which is a big work, which is what those level 2 kids really like.
Right. Another big work that I like to give 6-year-olds or just older children in my level 1 atrium is to pinprick the regions map of the land of Israel.
Yes.
So we have construction paper for each of the 4 colors of the 4 regions, and then they trace the region, like Judea, on the orange paper. It's orange, right? I think it's orange. And then they sit there with the pinprick. And do it. And it takes a couple weeks because, like you said, that second plane child wants bigger works that could potentially take a couple weeks.
Yes.
And that takes a long time.
That's a great idea. So they use the puzzle map as their template?
Yes.
Fabulous.
Yes.
I love that idea. Yeah. And so to us as adults, we would think, ooh, that's kind of boring, or that's not very challenging, or are they really going to want to do that? And as you said, yes, the big work is what they're after. What is the challenge that I have here? Because they want a challenge. They want to have to come back to it for several weeks. And I'm going to finish this. And then I'm going to make one for my friend. They just love that big work. So yeah, I think that's a great idea, Carrie. Just look at what you have in level 1 and see how you can make it more challenging, make it last longer. Look at the pieces a little more carefully. How can I take this apart a little bit more and have them put it together a different way? Because again, the repetition that's so important in level 1, in level 2, they don't like that repetition as much because it's not helping them learn a skill anymore.
Right.
I don't want to pour 10 times in order to conquer the ability to pour.
Right.
But I still need that repetition. So you have to offer it in a different way.
Right.
So I love that idea. That was a good idea, Carrie. Well
Somebody
done,
told me
you.
about it. It's not my idea. So, but it's the same thing with that 9-year-old child too. They walk around
Yes.
the level 2 atrium and they say, "I've done all this."
Yes.
When we know they haven't, but
Yes.
they don't want to repeat. They don't
Right.
want, and so you have to get kind of creative to get them
Yes.
to put their hands on materials again.
Yes. And Montessori says that this plane of development from 6 to 12, that the children are acquiring culture. And she defines culture by teaching them about the world around them.
Mm-hmm.
She includes natural and social sciences and the arts as well. So I think for the 9-year-old child, if you can make the materials in level 2 grow to include more scope of the world, that might be a way to entice them too. I was trying to think of examples before I knew we were going to do this podcast. And I was thinking to myself, how could you challenge them, say, with the maxims? Could they envision a way to help people live the maxims no matter what culture they were in or where they lived in the world?
Mm-hmm.
What would be required no matter where you lived in the world in order to really live the great law?
Mm-hmm.
Would it be different in different parts of the world? That is sort of mind-boggling, and you wouldn't even know where to start. But that's just the thing they would be really captivated by if it's a good fit.
Yeah.
Some kids are more interested in Bible study. Some kids are more interested in the geography work. Some kids are more interested in the moral life. So, you have to know your child well. Hopefully you've had them the first 2 years in level 2 already. And then you just try to break it open even bigger and bigger. One of the great things about being a level 2 catechist is you need to have that language that's very enticing. So you want to invite them to think about, I know you've looked at these maxims before, but I wonder how they would be lived in Africa. Would it be any different?
I
How
like
would
that.
how would you love your enemy if you lived, I don't know, in Australia?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean, that would be something they would have to think and talk about. I also think that salvation history chart, we forget about that, but that is a really, really great resource for that 3rd-year child. I think, number one, just for them to make their own, but also to notice that it delineates the Old Testament and the New Testament within salvation history. And so I wonder if they could think more about the Bible and relating it to the history of the kingdom of God, but looking at Old and New Testament. We don't do a lot of Old Testament yet. Most of that's level 3. But if it's a 9-year-old that's getting ready to go into level 3, you might be able to use that as a kind of enticement too. Like pretty soon you'll be reading a lot about the Old Testament. I wonder if you want to get to know it a little better before you start.
Yeah.
And how you might do that. So a lot of that is not necessarily written on an album page.
Right.
It's just that it's kind of breaking it open wider, 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 remembering the level 2 child is like a spider on a spider web, right? Montessori says they want the entire universe. You think of that contrast between the spider and the web. And so try to give them more and more and more of a scope of looking at the world, looking at the history of the kingdom of God. I also love those questions after you offer a presentation when you say something like, what does this tell us about the history of the kingdom of God? Or what does this tell us about how God works? Those wide open questions where they just kind of look at you like, they have to sit for a minute and then they start talking about it. It's that kind of that moment of, when you know that the gears in their head are turning, right? And they're
Right.
thinking, how would I answer this question? That's, I think, what our real invitation is, to try to have the 9-year-old get those moments of even further work. I remember a boy I had who decided he was going to draw, I think he called it the highway to heaven. And so along the way, it was almost like he drew it on a big piece of paper, and he had these little, almost that look like stalls or food trucks or something, and they had these different topics, and he'd show it to me, and then we'd talk about something else, and I'd think to myself, well, he doesn't have much on the moral life here. How might he bring that in? So then I'd ask him a question that I thought might lead him to that. So it was very interesting. It took a long time. And I don't know if he actually ever felt like he finished it or not, but he had a lot of good conversations off of that, traveling that road.
Yeah, that's interesting. And that really points out with this age child that they they're connecting, they're synthesizing
Yes,
so much
exactly.
more. So asking
Yes.
these kind of open-ended questions that help them think of connecting what we just talked about to something we have talked about before.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you brought that up because I think synthesizing is really underused in a lot of our atria.
Yeah.
And I think we need to remember that that's a skill that these level 2 kids can really, really get very good at. And sometimes when you look at it, say on your album page, you're going to do the synthesis of the infancy narratives. And you might not want to pull out all 6 at the beginning. You might want to start with just 2 and see how good they are at it. Because I think for some kids, it's a skill they haven't been asked to use anywhere else. So they don't have it developed very well yet. But the potential is there. So if you maybe just start with 2 or start with 3 and then keep adding and then start with another subject, we're going to synthesize the kingdom parables, but we want to do it with items in the atrium, not with the scripture booklets. So how would we do that? And it just enough to leave it open-ended that they have to think about it and talk about it and work on it together. I remember a children doing a synthesis work in level 2, and I think it was about the history of the kingdom of God. And they laid out all these mats. They're collecting all these different things from the atrium. And finally, one of the boys sat down on one of the mats, and one of the other children said, "You don't sit on the mat. Those are for materials." And he says, "Well, I'm a part of the kingdom of God."
Love it.
Yeah. And that was great. And he came to that on his own. And that, more conversation, right?
Right.
Which is just what you want. So
that's exactly what we want. That's the goal, right? Is to get them to think and talk.
Absolutely. And to
which
talk
is
with one
different
another.
than level 1.
Yeah. And we don't need to do that much. It's real easy to just step back, Don't forget that you still want to do a lot of observation in level 2. So just get them started and then sit back and, don't be a crutch for them. Let them do the work. Just get them started.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what about the 12-year-olds? Do you have the same, what do you see in a 12-year-old? Do you see that same antsiness that you see with a 9-year-old?
They're funny. Sometimes they've just gotten so comfortable, and the atrium is their place. And they know, and they're really strong in their communal prayer, and they know how to read their Bible well, and they want more grown-up topics. They want more grown-up conversation. I say grown-up, and I say grown-up because it's a puzzle to me. I have had conversations in level 3 where we've been reading a typology or something, and I finish the atrium session, I clean up, I leave, I go get in my car in the parking lot, I sit down and I think to myself, okay, those kids were 9 to 12-year-olds. They were not adults, but the conversation was as if they were adults. It was so good, so deep, so honest. Wow, I just love that about them. They are not afraid to really work to figure out what scripture is trying to say and how to live their lives in the kingdom. It's just tremendous. I just love that about them. 6 to 9s are too, but it just seems to get better and better,
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think we mentioned earlier that some kids really want to stay and have a 4th year of level 3. I haven't finished all the materials yet. Can I stay another year? Some kids are just so ready to go J-High and Sunday nights with the youth group, if that you've got that at your parish. So again, you want to observe those needs in them and respect those needs. I think it's really hard to define it for the 12-year-olds because it really depends a lot on your faith community.
Yeah.
What you offer, who you are, what your parishioners are like, what they're willing to do with the youth. It could vary a lot. But hopefully they're getting out into the wider world. I have had some kids come back and assist in a level 2 or a level 1 atrium after they've, quote, graduated or left CGS, which I think is wonderful. If they want to, then there certainly is not a requirement. But
well, I love this idea of Montessori talked about the parallel planes. So you have these kids who have moved out of level 3. They're in the 12 to 15 age.
Yes.
And Montessori talks about 12 to 15 being parallel to the 0 to 3-year-olds.
Yes.
So they would actually make really great assistants for your infant toddler atrium. And then your 15 to 18-year-old is a parallel plane to the 3 to 6. And I can't tell you how this knowledge has changed me as a mother, because I look at my teenage daughter so differently now that I like see, like, I know all the characteristics of a 3 to 6-year-old, and I see some of them in my 15 to 18-year-old child that's in that plane. And I'm like, okay, it's just a plane. It's just a stage of development, like it was freeing to me. But the 15 to 18-year-old, that age child, makes a really great catechist or assistant catechist for the level 1 atrium, because they are parallel. They get each other. They're parallel planes.
Yes. Isn't that beautiful?
It's great. I love that information.
Plus, a lot of times they usually need some kind of service hours around that age.
Yeah.
So, what better than to come and be in the atrium? And then, those are those essential presentations, and they're getting them indirectly, but hearing them once again with these older ears and minds and hearts. And how beautiful is that?
Right.
To have those reinforced, if you will, or offered again at this different stage. And it's just beautiful. I think it's such a gift. I've had some young women that have been wanting to become catechists and actually take formation at that age too, which is a very interesting experience. I felt partly bad for them because I thought we really haven't tailored formation for teenagers. They're sitting there receiving it in an adult form, and it's not the best, but that's all we've got. So it was funny because I remember one group especially, would always sit in their own table. They would never mix with the older adults, of course, because they were, had their friends and wanted to chat. But whenever the group as a whole was stumped on a direct aim, who got it? Were the teenagers.
That's interesting.
And so to your point, right? They're so essential. They're that 3 to 6-year-old again, just in an older body, in a different way, but in a way they're the same. And they go to the heart of the matter in a beautiful way. So yeah, I thought that was fascinating.
That is fascinating. That is so fascinating. There's definitely more to explore there in the adolescence and in our work in Catechesis of the Good Shepherd. I can't wait to read and learn from other people who experiment with that work. So.
Oh, I know. Yeah. There's so much potential there.
Yeah, there really is. It's exciting.
Yes.
So Diane, is there anything else that you want to say before we finish today?
Well, I thought it was interesting when I was reading that 4 Planes of Education that I mentioned earlier in the talk.
Yeah.
When she talked about how you really had to live the plane you were in well in order to do well in the plane you're about to move into. And she actually goes to the point of saying, you might know adults that are very much like a 3 to 6-year-old. They like their environment neat. They like things simple. It was just so startling. She says, so these people really never lived that plane well, and now this is where they're at. And then she says the same thing with the second plane. And I thought, wow, that is so interesting. And so
that is very interesting.
What is the goal, right? And so at the end of this paper, she says, we must take man himself, take him with patience and confidence across all the planes of education. We must put everything before him, the school, culture, religion, the world itself. We must help him to develop within himself that which will make him capable of understanding. It is not merely words, it is a labor of education. This will be a preparation for peace. For peace cannot exist without justice and without men endowed with a strong conscience and personality. Now, I really wanted to lift that up for catechists and parents. This is hard work. It asks a lot of us. And to what end? And so I wanted to give you those words of Montessori just to realize that we're building a culture of peace. If we can build children well and give them what they need in each of these stages, they will grow up to be peaceful, just, endowed with a strong conscience and personality. So we got to hang in there. It's a long, hard work, but it's so worth it.
Yeah. Send me that, and I will make sure that that quote is in our show notes so that if anybody wants to read it with their eyes,
Okay.
they can sit with it a little bit longer because there's a lot there.
Yeah. I think it's good to have that long-term goal, right?
Right.
What are
And
we
the big
doing day to
vision.
day? It's because this is tough, but it's a great work.
Yes. World peace. That's big.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you, Diane. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Well, thank you for having me. It's always so much fun. I enjoy it.
I enjoy it too. Thank you all for listening to this week's episode of the Good Shepherd and the Child podcast. In our show notes, you will find the quote that Diane just read for us. So if you would like to read it, I also put a link to the book, The 4 Planes of Education by Maria Montessori, that the quote is from. If you would like to purchase it from a Montessori source, it is there for you. I also have links in our show notes to past episodes that we have had Diane on the podcast with us. So if you would like to hear more of Diane's amazing wisdom, go check out those past episodes. This podcast is sponsored by the United States Association of the Catechesis of the Good Shepherd. We would like to thank all our contributing members because you are making this podcast possible. If you would like to know more about the Catechesis of the Good Shepherd, or if you would like to become a member, please go to cgsusa.org. Thank you all for listening. We will see you in 2 weeks. Go and fall more deeply in love with God.